So everyone, welcome to a session talking about routing security and the future of Whois. We put this session together somewhat ad hoc when we had a issue with constructing the program, and we were trying to think of something that we could put into a 90-minute whole that was interesting to the wider community, but also related to the core functional role that we have. And we've been talking for a while internally and one-on-one with people about this emerging problem of the nature of the systems we use to tell you about the distribution and use of resources in the wide. So today we're going to have 4 people, including myself, talking. Anurag from Hurricane Electric is going to kick off after I introduce. Felipe from the RIPE NCC is going to talk about some activity in their region, and Maz is going to talk. And then I'm going to come back and try to explore this idea: could we do better? Could we just do a bit better? So before we go into the other people's contents, I want to give you a history lesson. And the fundamental quality that I want you to think about is that Whois, this service that we talk about and use casually all the time, was never intended to be used the way we're using it. It was a directory service for individuals. It was who is that? It's a pun. It's a bad joke. It's the Whois service because it's who is. It's very old. You can tell it's old because it only has 3 digits for the RFC number. And we're up to 4 and we're up in the 9s and we're heading to 5. If Warrant has anything to do with it, we'll probably be at 11 by the end of the year. So this is a 1982 spec written back when there was only one source of NIC, and it was SRI NIC. And we did actually do some revision. We worked on it in 85, did a bit of a restrike, and we did it again in 2004. Okay, that's kind of recent. I mean, that's only 16 years ago. And what we were doing is simplifying the spec. We didn't add things, we took things out to say, what's the definition on the wire? So it is really just key value stored in the net. It doesn't define the structure of the records. It just says, here's a key, you tell me what it means. That's all it says. Connect on port 43 TCP, give a key, what do you get? And the predominant reason we use this now is not the personal directory. If I want to find my esteemed colleague Martin, I go and look in WhatsApp. I'm not looking for a central directory to tell me every Martin on the planet. It's just not going to happen. So, there is only one Martin Levy, I'm told. Okay, so he was unique. They broke the mold, but in general, we don't use this to look for people. We're using it for structural processes, and the predominant use is information about DNS domains. That's what most Whois data is. There are 300 million records in .com about the delegates who hold domains in .com, and there's probably another 200 million for .org, and a similar quantity in all the CCTLDs and GTLDs. So by sheer weight of numbers and volumes of users, the predominant use is about domain management. After that, it's being used in the number system in the RIRs to talk about number delegation record keeping. And then finally, after that, there is this other functional use, which is talking about routing configuration. So there are significant problems in taking a simple key value store and promoting it to do this job. There is no single format, and there is no format or information model that is applicable even within one context. So if we forget about the predominant use in the domain space and we talk solely about the use within the RIR system, we have three formats. We have ARIN's mechanism of publishing data, and we have the RIPE mechanism of publishing data that is shared between RIPE and APRICOT and APNIC, and we have the LACNIC mechanism of publishing data. So immediately, this cohesive community, we have created a world where everyone has to deal with three mechanisms to deal with Whois. And there's no consistency in the data model between CCTLDs, the GTLDs, and between them and us and the Routing Registry framework, IRR, that's the component of Whois that is talking specifically about routing. So, some Whois services understand internationalization. They know how to do diacritical marks. They know how to do non-Western alphabet. Do all of them? No. No, by no means. So there's no ability to deal with the lived reality that most resources now are held by people who are not native English speakers and whose address structures, even as simple as where do you live, is not necessarily expressed using concepts like street or house number. There are significant communities worldwide who have totally different ways of talking about where people live, and we don't have a consistent way of representing that when we show the delegation record for an internet number. It's not fully connected. If you go and ask ARIN about resources, they're kind enough to say, actually, those resources aren't with us, you need to go look in RIPE. Or if you ask RIPE, they say, no, actually, those resources vest in LACNIC, but the system doesn't make it easy for you to just get to LACNIC to get those resources. It's a barrier. And it's impossible to do any kind of wide-scale distribution unless you're prepared to do this using very low-level distribution mechanisms. It's not a protocol. We can just give this to content management and say, you guys, you take care of giving this to the world. So let's drill down and let's focus on IRR. IRR, Internet Routing Registry, is about statements for configuring routers, and it uses a language called RPSL, which was actually defined by the RIPE NCC, and then they took that and put it into the wider public standard space. So Whois is old, but RPSL is not exactly young. RPSL is a 4-digit standard, but it's from 1998. And it was defined and then revised later in 99, and then some security features were added later on. And then in 2005, some additional work was done because it didn't understand how to specify IPv6. So around 2016, the idea emerged that we knew there was cryptography in RPKI, and we knew there was router configuration management in RPSL. Couldn't we combine the two? And some work was done by Rob Kistelecki and Brian Haberman. So this is another instance of the RIPE NCC doing really interesting work, thinking about models of managing data. And it said, here's a way we could add RPKI signatures into the RPSL structures in Whois. But the problem is, it didn't actually get wide-scale release. It didn't happen. So although we have a spec for how we could make these two worlds live, it just didn't happen. And instead, we have this problem that there's the world we really live in for delegation. And that world is looking at this mechanism called RDAP. It's not about routing configuration anymore. We've gone right back up to the top. What are we doing here? We're using it to record delegation information. RDAP does do internationalization, and it does have a logical structure. And it is fully connected. You can use a CDN. It redirects so everybody glues together. And it's really, really strongly aligned between the domain use and the number use. And that's really attractive. So there is some potential for this to become something that we could seriously say will fix a significant number of problems that we have in the world. ICANN has had this open festering sore called the ICANN Whois problem that people have been working on for a long time, trying to come up with a cohesive information model in their space. RDAP is essentially the solution. And we can talk about adding new types and models. We can actually understand private information and maybe say that we'll hide people's personal details unless you're an authorized user. It's got federated access models emerging. It's really very interesting. So the problem is that in the IRR world, to dive back down, we don't yet have a sense of global cooperation in this framework. We have lots of individual spaces that are using RPSL to make declarations about routing configuration, but they don't necessarily have that crypto component of a strong proof of authority. And they're very disconnected. The signatures idea that Wright put forward, it just didn't happen. And instead, we're living in two worlds. We're living in a world where on one side, we have cryptographically provable statements about what people are doing with their numbers. So your intent is provable by using strong cryptography. That's RPKI, that's the ROA. And on the other side, we have this model of using Whois, using IRR, that I call trust the publisher. It's not based on anything you can validate or verify. It's based on a belief. The publisher does the checking and you just read the data and believe what you see. And the problem for me is that these two worlds are essentially operating in an isolated manner. Now, I need to flag that there is modifications that have been implemented by Job Snijders from NTT in a new version of code which provides the IRR function. That code is able to say, let's bridge this gap. Let's understand that if somebody creates information in IRR and they've made a different assertion in a cryptographically provable way, we're not going to talk about the thing that can't be proved. We're going to say the provable cryptography replaces the unprovable conflicting assertion in IRR. And I think there's something significant there that we need to think about and we need to talk about. So, where I'm going to is that I think we have to try to do better. We have to learn how to do better. RPSL is not going to go away because it isn't only saying the one critical thing a ROA says. A ROA says, I need to originate a prefix from a specific AS. And there is one object in an IRR which says this is a route object declaring a prefix and an origin AS. But there are many other things that are said in IRR. There are import and export statements, and there are declarations of router configuration, and there's a number of things that people do that can't simply be expressed using RPKI. So RPSL is not going to go away. But when you come to that one function where both systems can say prefix origin AS, there is one thing that RPKI does which IRR can't do. And that one thing is max length. The idea that when you make a declaration of your routing intent, you not only say how much prefix you have and the origin, you say how much you're going to fragment that making routing assertions in the network. I've got a 32 in V6. I'm going to announce 48. So there's a way in a rower to say, let me announce any prefix length between my allocation, my 32, and a 48. If you want to say that, in an IRR, you actually have to make 65,000 route objects, which is not something I think the community at large wants to have to do, because that will be 65,000 records per ISP that they have to parse and process. And it will be 65,000 extra things to be fetched over the network. It's not an inherently sensible goal to try and say, oh, we can just simply populate the forest of IRR with all the things to represent the max length. So we actually have to think about this. And one possibility, and this is a serious possibility, is that we should stand up and say, max length is actually possibly a really bad idea. And the reason for that is not really the subject of this talk, but there are routing security reasons why simply saying I may announce a longer prefix and here's my crypto proof is a very bad idea. The principal one is if you don't actually announce that prefix, anybody else can. They can announce it saying, Maz, who has a 32, is also announcing a /48. I can reach it. And under the rules of routing, longest prefix wins. So even though his covering 32 aggregate is a short path in AS terms, if I put my hand up and say, I see a route to Maz for this 48, people are going to send me the data, believing I'm going to pass it on. So having a max length that allows anyone here to declare a route saying, I can do that, if Maz isn't announcing it, we're the best path. And you actually have to construct filters that are going to somehow intuit that shouldn't have happened. But we don't have a way to do that in RPKI. So max length is inherently dangerous if it's about potential routes. If you make it match actual routes, that's okay, but not potential. So, enough from me. Why don't we hear from the other people here some sense of what has been going on in the world of routing and routing security? And at this point, I'd like to ask Anurag if he could come up and give his talk. Thank you.
So, thanks, George, for the introduction and excellent overview of the max length thing. Before I start my slides, I must say, as a community trainer, whenever we are talking about routing, I always tell people, don't deaggregate all the way up to 24. And I repeat the same about RPKI. If you have a bigger chunk, don't set max length all the way to 24 in IPv4 or 48 in IPv6. Be realistic.
If I had chocolate, I would give you chocolate.
Anyways, good morning, everyone. My name is Anurag. I work at Hurricane Electric, and I'll be talking about IRR stats for Oceania. George already covered IRR in a bit of overview. I'll just quickly touch it, and then I'll jump onto the statistics. So introduction, well, it's Internet Routing Registry. What exactly IRR means, it's essentially the public registers where you say what you want to do and then you do. So who can run an IRR? Well, anyone. You can, the IRR daemon is open source. It's available on GitHub, so you can download that, spin up a server, and just be an IRR. What makes certain IRRs more powerful than, say, just a randomly set up IRR is the fact that RADB is a popular IRR which mirrors 20 plus other IRRs, and A lot of tools end up in pointing towards RADB. So from practical experience, a large number of network operators just look at what is there in RADB and try to generate their filters out of that, which makes these certain IRRs more powerful than, say, a randomly set up IRR. You can set up an IRR and actually go and convince RADB to mirror you, and then you are there in the picture. What exactly do you do in IRR? So in these registers, you register a route object. It can be for IPv4 or IPv6, and you register AS sets, which are set of AS numbers, which essentially, in context of, say, providing service, can include your downstream members. In context of running an internet exchange, that may be your members, and so on. Just a quick example of what an route object look like. I'm just querying RADB here. It's just one of the IPs. It says it's coming from this /17 prefix, the origin AS number, and the source database. Source database can be from other 20 odd IRRs when you are querying RADB, as I previously said, which includes APNIC, RIPE, LACNIC, and all other databases. And it also includes the other options like RADB itself and AllDB.
And it includes JPIRR.
Yep. An example of an AS set. So here I have just a demonstration AS set, AS Anurag. I'm just querying that one, and it just shows me the members. This happens to be the AS, it's my on AS number, and this happens to be an AS number, supposedly my downstream. And here's the source AllDB, because it's just coming from AllDB. Again, remember, I'm querying RADB while the source is AllDB here, so that's it. So now I'll jump on to the statistics of IRR for some of the countries in this region. How good or bad are the statistics? And then we can analyze what are the possible reasons for those. So for Australia, here's the mechanism I used. I look at the APNIC delegated file coming from the APNIC FTP server. I pulled all the ASNs which are delegated to Australia, and then I tried to pull all the prefixes IPv4 and IPv6 belonging to Australia, coming from one of the RIPE RIS dumps. This would include all the allocations which are done for Australia, but would very likely skip any of the AS numbers which are from outside and are now being used in Australia. Take example of Martin sitting over there with his with Cloudflare's AS number coming from Erin region while being set up here in Melbourne. So my data does not cover those specific cases. So I found somewhere around 22,000 odd prefixes, out of which 18,000 have a matching route object. What that matching route object means, the origin which is there in the BGP routing table actually matches what is visible in IRR at least. I say at least because there are cases, and there are high number of cases where IRR data says multiple ASN, not just one. So these are the cases which it at least matches with one of the multiple available origins. There's something like 3,400 mismatches, and 411 prefixes have no route object whatsoever. So if you look at this graph, you are looking at something like 83 odd percentage is matching, and 15% is a clear mismatch. If anyone is using RPSL for filtering, they are supposed to filter this remaining chunk of 17% odd ASNs, including the missing and the mismatch. Are they doing or not? I'll come to that after the statistics. IRR data for Fiji, so something around 322 ASNs, so 50-50, 50% with match, a little more than 50% with mismatch, and 2 of the prefixes have no route object whatsoever. So if you are filtering based on RPSL, you are supposed to black hole half of the Fiji prefixes, which may not be a good idea. For New Caledonia, it's actually a pretty good number, 94% matching, then somewhere around 2.4, which is just 2 prefixes each in mismatching and missing route objects. For New Zealand, 88%, a little better than Australia, coming up 5%. So 88.3% with matches, 10% with mismatch, and 1.2% which is missing. So again, a pretty high number of prefixes here. which are mismatching, where the information in IRR is conflicting, or essentially where someone is saying, I want to do X, while in BGP routing table, they are doing Y. For PNG, it's 94%, although the number of prefixes is lower based on the size, but we still see somewhere around 6 prefixes with a mismatch as well as missing information. Vanuatu, 97% prefixes are all good, so it's out of 69, 67 are fine. 1 prefix mismatching, 1 prefix missing in the table. So this brings me, what are the challenges with IRR? Why data is not so good? And if you notice, say for large economies like Australia and New Zealand, it's not really up to the mark. Well, the first point is the network effect. So less incentive for the people to use it if less people are using it, and vice versa. It's very similar to the chat application you might be using. You may use chat application 1 if all of your friends are on 1, and you may not use chat application 2 if everyone else is not there on the 2. So this brings the challenge where unless a large set of people use IRR properly, for remaining there is very low incentive. And if networks are routing this remaining 17 or 13% of routes anyway, what's the incentive for people to bother with route object? They can just start announcing prefixes without even creating a route object or without even updating and deleting the older entries from the IRR. So that's the part on the network effect. Then multiple IRR databases, as I said, exist, and anyone can be an IRR, so they can have conflicting information. So you may see a prefix saying that the origin is AS, say ASX, while on RADB, while for the same prefix, APNIC database may say ASY in the origin. Which one you're going to trust? Then comes the third part, which is generating config is just one of the parts. So you can use RPSL for generating configuration for your routers, but then pushing that configuration on regular intervals to the device is still another part of the challenge. It's quite easy if you look at just one platform. It becomes very hard in a large network with different set of platforms, and this becomes very hard, especially with the older hardware, which may not support programmable options and automation to make it work. So unless you are dynamically updating it, it becomes more and more hard. So that's specifically the challenges with respect to IRR. Some of the quick references are BGP Toolkit, from where I pulled some of the data, RIS, from where I pulled the routing table information to pick the prefixes based on the IS number. A nice blog post by FCIX, which is Fremont Cabal Internet Exchange, on introduction on RPSL. It's 50% of that covers RPSL, and then 50% is about a specific IRR or DB. You may read the first 50%, might be quite interesting. And of course, IRR website, if you are curious who are the IRRs right now, which are popular ones, and you can also see all the IRRs listing the source database which they are mirroring. So you can see something like RADB, and the databases it is mirroring to figure out the potential of having number of sources with conflicting information. That's about it. Any questions?
So thank you for this, Anurag. I think the underlying observation of the variance of accuracy of the data is very, very interesting, because if we were closer to a sense that we were in the high 90-95% accuracy, there would be a clear sustaining signal. This is a mechanism that the community understands. When we see signs that people are as low as 50% compliance, it's a very strong signal. As a community of operators, we actually don't understand the implications of the tool. And I think that's something we have to think about very carefully.
Sure.
The point that for me is very important is that Merit, who operate RADB, are in some senses running a federation of information. And I place extremely high value on that federated service. But it comes with a qualifier. It's trust the publisher. And until we hear the signal that Merit is operating a filter that respects RPKI, which I believe is work in progress, that model has inherent weaknesses, which I find concerning. But I think we should give respect to Merit for making that investment to provide that federated services.
Sure. Yeah, I actually did not cover the RPKI statistics. I did run my script to also match RPKI data for the same economies. It was much better, but then again, I'm trying to stick with IRR here to see how good or bad the IRR data is. And I did previously studied around 5 or 6 months ago, I tried to look at the entire routing table of 700,000 plus odd IPv4 routes. And if you look at the entire table, the number is actually somewhere around 20% has mismatch or missing information. So it's extremely hard to...
It's extremely hard, high error rate and a hard problem. Unfortunately, I spoke over time, and as a consequence, I'm going to have to move things along. Felipe, would you be happy to come and talk about the work in RIPE? Thank you, Anurag.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Felipe. I work at the RIPE NCC. And today I'd like to give a talk about Routing Registry, more specifically about some of the improvements we have been making on it over the past couple of years. First, I'll start with the problem statement. So which kind of improvements you want to make. So why you want to make improvements in the Routing Registry. It's all about data accuracy. The accuracy in the Routing Registry is suboptimal. In our region, one of the main culprits is the so-called out-of-region objects. They have existed for a very long time, and they are very easy to create. There was a well-known maintainer with an actual the password in the object itself. We did no holdership verification, so pretty much anyone could create anything on our Routing Registry. There's also a notorious lack of maintenance. So people create objects there and just leave it behind like for many years, and then it's not matching what's being seen in BGP anymore. And the result, of course, is a lot of data inaccuracy. So in this chart, you can see, so we are matching what's being seen in BGP announcements versus what's in the Routing Registry. Within our service region, so it's Europe, Russia, and Middle East, is not too bad. It's mostly green. But as soon as you move out from our service region, it starts to get pretty bad. So especially around the APNIC region, you can see there is a lot of reds there. So that's the problem statement. The accuracy of the Routing Registry is not very good, and it's mainly caused by the so-called out-of-region objects. So what are you doing about this? I'm going to talk now mainly about two policies that have been proposed by our community that aim to fix this problem. So the first policy is the one called NWI5. And this one is all about stopping the creation of such objects. So we're getting rid of this maintainer. And also flagging those objects using the source attribute in the RPSL object and flagging them as RIPE-no-auth. The idea behind this is to basically tell the world that these objects are not reliable. Around 70,000 of such objects have been impacted by this policy, and we implemented it roughly 1.5 years ago. So most of these objects were in the APRICOT region, so around 50,000 of those, and the rest was spread across the three other RARs, so 2,900 in APNIC region, 14,000 in ARIN, and 1,300 in LACNIC. And one task that we took very seriously was the communications part. And there's a lot of people scripting things around, and they might not be expecting to see this ripe-no-auth coming out of the source attribute, so that might break their scripts. So I tried to contact everyone. In general, I think we did a pretty good job. It went more or less smooth. However, there were a couple of hiccups here and there. So our advice is, if you're doing a task like this, do not underestimate the communications part. It's very important. The other policy is the 2018-06, and this one is about trying to clean up the mess. So the idea is to remove the route objects flagged as ripe-no-auth if there is a conflicted ROA. So the idea is to use RPKI data as the authoritative source, and if there is a mismatch, then we delete such objects. And the rationale behind this is that the RPKI ROAs, they have way higher accuracy than the routing registry. So if there is a mismatch, most likely the ROA will be correct. This policy reached a strong consensus around mid last year, and we just finished implementation like a couple of weeks ago. So far, we deleted around 1,000 of those objects, but it's an ongoing effort. We are running a script daily, and if new ROAs are created, that might cause some of this old out-of-region objects to be deleted. So this is the similar chart and the one I said before, but this time with the RPKI data. And this one includes information from all the 5 trust anchors. And what they're doing here is the same on the previous charts, or just matching what's being seen in BGP with the ROA, so with the RPKI data. And the accuracy is pretty high. So there is like 99.9% match between the ROAs and the BGP announcements. So that was this 2 policies that we have implemented. We're also doing some things out of our own initiative, also with the aim to improve the accuracy of the routing registry. So one of the things we're doing is to integrate our RPKI dashboard with the routing registry. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with our dashboard. Did anyone here already used it? Just you? Okay, more people. Yeah, so the basic idea behind our dashboard is that we list your prefixes, we see what's being announced in BGP, we use the RIS for that, and then we look if there is a ROA that matches this prefix. And if the ROA makes the BGP announcement invalid, we flag that, and we say, hey, click here to fix it. Maybe you want to fix it, or maybe that's actually how it's supposed to be, that BGP announcement should not be there. So what we're doing now is to also include route objects and offer a similar functionality. So maybe you have a ROA covering this announcement, but do not have a route object. So there'll be a button there saying, click here to create one. So that's basically it, what I had to say. I'll be very happy to hear feedback from you guys. So feel free to go to the microphone and tell what kind of improvements I would suggest for us to do. We'll also be happy to have a coffee with you afterwards. I'll be around until the end of the week.
Please state your name at
Warren
the
Kamari.
microphone.
Ooh, this is too tall for me. So Warren Kamari, I live in the US, so I was an ARIN customer. Mm-hmm. When this was introduced, I argued fairly strongly against it, largely because I really like the RIPE database. Mm-hmm. And it felt unreasonable to me that I would be losing it because you know, I'd be non-author. If I ever touched my records, I'd lose them. Somebody made the suggestion you could just transfer your stuff to RIPE. And at first that seemed unreasonable, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I transferred to RIPE, and I've been way happier. Mm-hmm. So, you know, other people who are in a similar situation, the RIPE database is just so much friendlier than the ARIN one. Mm-hmm. If you move there, you can use it. Sorry, Kathy.
Thank you.
Taiji from APNIC. I'm wondering about the one thing. the data concept between RPSL and RPKI, especially ROA. We have 0 in ROA that shows the prefix specified by ROA is not announced. But in RPSL, we cannot specify 0. Then the newest implementation of IRR DB4 erases all different data, different route object from ROA. So one ISP in Japan is thinking of how do we register route object in IRR. One thing we can think is that we only register route object as the routes we can see in the full route. But historically, maybe it is not described clearly. All AS registers their prefixes as route object having their own AS number. It's not 0. So I think we need more discussion on the data synchronization between IRR and RPKI.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Felipe, are you okay if I comment on this?
Yeah, please.
So, Taiji, you make a very important overall point, and I wish to say I think we do need to talk about this, and we need to talk with software developers and with publishers of IRR data about the intersection of RPKI and IRR. But there is also the conversation that goes the other way. What does it mean when you start using RPKI? And in the discussion of RPKI, we had a very clear internalized story that maybe we did not adequately communicate. If you create any rower for your prefix with any AS, AS0 or a valid AS, you are declaring all statements about routing of more specifics must exist as rower. The minute the covering aggregate has an assertion in RPKI, all children, all more specifics, all subdelegates are necessarily required to be asserting rowers to be valid. And this was an absolute statement that is bound in logic. It's not possible to be half crypto. Once you dive in, you must use cryptography to assert your intention for routing. So making an AS0 didn't have one function, it has 2 functions. Function 1 is to say, do not announce this covering aggregate, and function 2 is all statements about routing intent necessarily will exist as rower. And that was baked into the implications of RPKI. But your underlying statement, we need to talk about this between the 2 information models, yes, that is absolutely true. Felipe, thank you. That was extremely informative, and your chart of the state of routing accuracy, I think was very useful. Martin, I'm sorry. I ignored you and I take it back. I will do my thanks later.
I feel like sitting down now. Martin Levy from Cloudflare. We're a member of RIPE, APNIC, APRICOT, LACNIC, and ARIN. We operate in all regions. And I want to sort of bring up to the conversation, following up on your talk and George's earlier, about the amount of use of RPSL and why it is used. And RIPE is in a very special camp. There are a set of pedantic users within the RIPE region that do not exist anywhere else in the world, who, no, even they eclipse the usage in Japan.
Impossible.
Because RPSL as a language is, from my last look, the complex parts, the real parts of it, the part that make a difference, is used by maybe 2%, if that, of networks. And they're all in the RIPE region, with outliers everywhere else, but they really are in the RIPE region. And it is an amazingly complicated language to define over and above the RFC. The RFC still leaves holes, and if you try and write, as I have done, an actual parser in software, you can't. So I just want to bring to the microphone this sort of general rule of life, of sort of the KISS principle. Sometimes you see something very complicated out there. It has been proven that you can use it, but that doesn't mean it should be used under all circumstances. And I just want to be able to say that within this, because there needs to be a detractor at the microphone for talking about RPSL. And I am being very careful at what I say by not saying it must be shut down. It's just that when it is used, and when it is defined, it is very complex and maybe far more than is needed inside the industry. And hopefully, if that mindset was taken up, the gap between RPKI, which is amazingly simple in its data structure, and RPSL, with this intermediary of just dumb IRR objects, but RPSL is way too complicated, and never the twain shall meet. It's never going to happen. So I just want to bring this to the microphone, and it really is something I should bring to the microphone within a RIPE meeting. But I'd have tomatoes or tomatoes thrown at me at that point. I know that. Sorry, this was more a comment than a question, and I do apologize to everybody for that.
Thank you.
Martin, I apologize for not recognizing you in the queue. That was a mistake. Unfortunately, I talked over time, and we are under a time pressure. So I would like to thank you, Felipe, for a very interesting talk. Thank you. And I would like to invite Masazaki Yoshinobu to come to the stage and talk about JPIRR, or whatever interests him.
Who's quicker? Oh, this one. Hi, this is Maz. I'm working for Japanese ISP IIJ. So we are using IRR. We maintain our object at RDAP and JPIRR because most of our number resources are allocated by JPNIC. So that's why we are using JPIRR, and also RDAP because of the historical reason, right? So we maintain maintenance object, of course, and then we are using PGP for authorization. So we register key sort object, ASNAM object just in case, and mostly we rely on the route and route 6 and ASET object because we are using ASET object to generate our route filtering rules, right? And we cannot have such information on the RPKI. That's why we are still using IRR to describe our routing policy, right? There are a bunch of garbage in the IRR, especially in the RDAP, because some people just register a bunch of the route object by using their own route information. So they don't check. Just to open that filtering rule, they register information without any care. So sometimes the people forget about the IRR, then information is outdated, right? Or sometimes the people make mistake. There are objects registered without resource holder's permission, right? So at the JPNIC, they operated their own IRR named the JPIRR. It has an interesting functionality, garbage collection system. So it's aggressive functionality. Objects are automatically deleted in 12 months. So each year, you need to register again and again and again, right? But by that, we can reduce the number of outdated information on JPIRR. We had a big discussion with this functionality, but still, yeah, we thought it's a good idea, then it's working well so far. So registrants are notified 1 month before the deletion. So at that point, we can renew our object by registering the same object. IRR has no hierarchy, right? Each IRR is independent. So to such an, for example, to such an A set object, you need to know which IRR was used to register that information. That's a different story from the usual number resources, right? For numbers, yeah, it has a hierarchy from INR to RIRs and then NIRs, right? By looking at such a chain, you can find the exact information you want to know. But for IRR, we don't have such a hierarchy, right? So then we have name collisions. Because it has no hierarchy. Sometimes object name is not unique, because the namespace is independent each other. So you can put same name object, but having the different record object, right? So A set name collision is pretty popular in the operational world. Like, for example, before, Bhutan Telecom registered their A set as an AS-BT. But some other operator also using the same name object in a different place.
Some other operator.
Oh, yeah.
Who could that be?
Not British Telecom anymore, because probably they might have the same issue. Yeah. And then also, we have a research entity, Signet, in Japan. They were using AS-Signet, but there is a different Signet in Iran. They were also using AS-Signet as their AS-set name. Right? And we don't have clear consensus of the notation. Sometimes just put an AS-set to describe your routing policy, but sometimes to get more uniqueness or preciseness, people put an IRR database name in front of the AS set, and sometimes they put a colon or double colon. It's depending on the organization, right? The naming style of AS set also varies. It's interesting. Sometimes people use AS-service name or AS-AS number or AS number and then colon something service name. So don't know how can we deal with such a freestyle naming for AS set. And you can have a AS set as a member of your AS set. The member AS set may be registered in another IRR. For example, there is the AS set named AS-Google. It has a member AS set named AS-Meebo or something. There are 2 objects in the world. One is registered in the RDAP, another one is registered in the airing. And those are different. Don't know which one is correct. Anyway, so some ops like an IIJ, we tend to avoid to use AS set members. So our AS set is mostly AS numbers only by resolving the customer's AS set by ourselves to reduce the confusion on the peer side. Not going well. Yep. So I have a wish list here. So accuracy of object is important, but I want to have more searchability for IRR. Distributed, yeah, that's good, but need some kind of a hierarchy so that we can say, so given the name of the AS set, we can clearly find the registry for that. Or we can have a single registry for IRR, then RIRs can act as a registrar for that. Or just we need a uniqueness on the AS set name. So if we can agree on the common notation for that, that's good enough. So that's my conclusion. And then any question, comment, suggestions?
Anurag, please state your name.
You just stated my name. Hi, this is Anurag. Have you checked how tools like IRR toolset or BGP Q3 react to such situations when you have an AS set available on multiple sources?
As in, by the name collision, we had many issues, so not sure the actual implementation of the IRR tool, but we have some operator confused by the name collision, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Maz, if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to thank you for that presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So, as the moderator, I have the wonderful ability to hijack the agenda of the meeting and carry it to a place I feel I need this meeting to go. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, I did. I have constructed this agenda as a story, as a history story of my personal belief of issues in how we are using Whois to provide a service that is about information in the wide, information services predominantly for domain names, information about numbers, and then the specific community that are using this framework to perform router configuration and filtering. And we have heard from Anurag about the extent to which, even in our own region, people don't actually produce IRR products at a high enough level of accuracy they could be used reliably to construct filters for all economies. It just won't work. If you use the IRR mechanism, there are significant places within our own region and internationally where the information is not cohesive or complete or correct. And that's a significant problem. That was the takeaway in my head from what Anurag said. And then we heard Felipe talking about the work the RIPE NCC have been doing, dealing with data that is in their duty of care, but it's an externality. It's not part of their authority as a registry. It's a service to the wider community. And they became aware of the significant concern. Where is the authority to act? And they actually had a conversation in their community about closing off an open door, an open password, an open maintainer, closing off providing this kind of service. And Felipe explained how they have gone further and they have actually decided to not allow information to persist which is not aligned with the RPKI. So this also is a key message to me. We have to respect the authority model. Trust where I publish. because I say so is not a fundamentally sound mechanism for providing this service. So Anurag told us that there is a central location, Merit, that is collecting IRR data from at least 20 sources and providing a federated view. And I think this goes to something that is interesting about the availability of information at a single point. But if I bring back to Maz's observation, Maz is noting that there is no consistency in this information. The syntactic constructs that people use to declare their routing intent is not common. And the names that are used to uniquely identify elements of data in this framework are not unique. And Maz talked about garbage collection as an approach within JPIRR to require people to recommit to the quality of their routing statements, the integrity of their routing intent. But that isn't something that is universal in the IRR. There is no universal garbage collection. There is no universal requirement to recommit. And I would invite you to think about the fact that in RPKI, all certified statements have a lifetime. No certificate can be issued in X509 that doesn't have a terminating date, which makes all cryptographic objects in RPKI finite in time. You must reaffirm your intent. So, I come to my hijack of your goodwill. If this button will let me. Guys, do you have my last set of slides? I'm being told that we have to cut off the hand of the operations group. He's holding his hand off so I can cut it off. No, he's saying just cut off the finger. Okay, so I would like to discuss a possible future model. And this future model is to implement Job Snyder IRRD work which respects RPKI ROA as a mechanism for gating the things that we show in the IRR. So I actually have gone further. And I want to say, let's talk about registry next generation. Let's talk about do better. So not just doing things because we always have, not just doing Whois because in 1982 somebody wrote a 3-letter RFC and that's how we do it. Why don't we do things that align with modern views of data management? Use a web protocol, use CDNs, use cryptography. PII, personally identifying information, was not a significant concern when we started this journey. Why don't we respect people's rights to privacy and actually start gating the data? Why don't we use parsable forms? RPSL is lovely. It's type value notation. It's a well-defined spec. It's extremely painful to work with. And we could do so much better. And we could respect internationalization. So I am not formally proposing, because this is not a policy meeting, and we do not do policy from within the Secretariat, but I'm inviting you as a community to consider going back to a simpler model where we separate the delegation record keeping from IRR. Move statements of our routing intent to a different source, provide a federated services analogous to Merit, but have a clear structural separation between the assertions about delegation and the assertions about routing. And in this stage, people would still see things that they need to see. They wouldn't have to worry that the data is not available. But then we could go further. We could go to a model using respect of RPKI, and we could actually implement the same filter that RIPE has implemented. If you assert a route object and it does not align with your cryptographic statement of intent, we will not show that to the community. The second half is that we can actually consider synthesizing route objects that reflect your routing intent. And I feel this may help, I not say fix, but help the problem that Taiji has highlighted, that if you assert a null route using AS0, all of your route objects are potentially not valid. I believe if we consider synthesis of route objects and the use of rowers, we can actually bridge this gap, or there may be other work we can do. So I would actually like us to talk about this because I have a separate goal which doesn't relate to the IRR problem. And that is the goal of improving the general community benefit in the Whois problem. I have been watching the ICANN Whois problem debate for many years, and I've been talking to individuals who work in this space in ICANN, talking about RDAP as a mechanism to confront this problem. And I feel we actually do now understand in the wide. Remember, the vast majority of Whois, by count of records and by queries and by intent, does not relate to routing. It relates to the simple question, who has delegation of authority over this resource? That problem can be solved in RDAP. And it is a question that is completely separated. It's divorced from the function of the routing registry. Well, I'm going to qualify that because there is a nexus. We need you to trust the IRR, and we need to assert what is the authority over statements made in the IRR. But that is a descent function from the delegation of authority. And the cryptography in RPKI actually provides that proof. So maintainers, maintainer passwords, maintainers using PGP keys are a mechanism that should never have been in the public view. That's a mechanism for you as an individual to assert your token to say, please apply a change. The mechanism that should be publicly visible is an assertion by the registry, we have delegated the resource to this entity. And if we couple that with an assertion, they have this public-private key pair, then their signed assertions are a statement under the authority of a delegation. These things I say about my routing are provably what I want. And that's a very strong service, very strong. So I believe quite strongly we actually should have this conversation, and we should consider this opportunity to look at what we do in Whois and deliberately say, can we do better? So we actually have to keep on operating a delegation record keeping service. And we have to make a publicly available view of the states of delegation. And my intent is that we try to make the formalism, what is the public view, RDAP. Move the community from using Whois to using RDAP. And then I would like to project a hypothetical timeline. So this is not the absolute statement, it's an idea. How would you feel as a community if we set a target of deprecating Whois over a 5-year window? Put a line in the sand and say, by 2025, we will shut down routine broadcast of information about delegations in Whois. So we could actually make changes in that space. We could perform redirection. We could alter our web services. We could communicate with software vendors. And we could also invert something we're currently doing. Right now, we make RDAP by taking a Whois record and reconstructing from RPSL the JSON data we need to serve. How about if we inverted that model? And how about if we said the canonical data is the JSON, but for your convenience, we've constructed a view of this in the Whois protocol. But this is not the canonical record. This is not the ground truth of what it is to be a delegate. The ground truth is published in RDAP. And in that system, we draw a clear line under Whois and we put it into legacy. Now, legacy is a very interesting word. Legacy to some people means code which is so important, we are afraid to touch it. But I actually prefer a definition of legacy as something that you respect and you understand, but you do not necessarily continue to do. So I'd like to treat a Whois legacy statement quite clearly as a Whois deprecation statement. We're going to stop doing this. But I can't make that decision in the Secretariat. That's a consent decision that has to come from the wider community, which means I need to understand if there is any interest or motivation to even explore this space. Because simply undertaking this work would be profoundly disrespectful. You are the people who have the delegations. You are the people who are also consuming the information. And if you feel you wish to stay in a Whois world, I'm going to have to respect that desire. Folks, it's open microphone time. David, please state your name at the microphone.
David Woodgate, Telstra. I'd like to support everything you've just said. I've been looking at, obviously been acquainted for Whois for a few decades now. It is definitely showing its age. And I've also been acquainted with IRR for a few decades now. And honestly, there's been a lot of that time I haven't really trusted the data in IRR overall. Like to see, pleased to see a stronger trust model and that anchorage between between the resource delegations to the routing that you've talked about, and that's a conclusion I'd already reached in what we're seeing. And in terms of RDAP versus Whois, speaking as somebody who, when a phone number is published in Whois, and you get phone calls from random people who inquire of you why you're attacking their personal computer at home.
I should say at this point that for many reasons that are too complicated to explain, I am that phone number in respect of NetBlock 1.1.1.0/24, except for the routing component which vests with Cloudflare. So I too share your burden.
I think it's fair to say that Whois has done a wonderful job, but it is also showing its age and its initiation from a more naive time of the naive and innocent time of the internet, and it certainly needs to move on from where it is now.
So I wish I had had the foresight to ask you to say what you just said at the microphone, because that kind of question, which in those terms we would call a Dorothy Dixer, is delightful. But I didn't ask you to say that. And it pleases me immensely that you want to stand up and say that of your own initiative. So thank you, David.
You're very welcome.
I think Martin Levy's observation is something that I'm going to reflect on a great deal, because I started in my first pack saying there is a significant reason why RPSL is immensely valuable and we must retain this ability to specify complex filtering, routing configuration logic in RPSL. And then Martin stood up and said, yeah, but nobody does that. It's 2%. 99%, 98% of what people do is they fetch route objects and they fetch AS set objects, and that's it. And I'm sitting here thinking, if these are the only things that people actually need from a globally connected IRR service, we're making the world much more complicated than we have to. So I thank you for that comment at the mic, Martin, because I think it's very interesting. Anurag.
Thanks for not asking to state the name again.
Anurag.
The problem with IRR, which were discussed, and also I covered in the slides, is a lot more around the route object, but there's another part which is missing from the discussion here is the AS sets, which are quite outdated. In a possible world of world without Whois, or probably with the next generation of Whois, how do you think things will change with respect to AS sets and the way we manage them right now?
I am very attracted to the two things I referred to in Maz's talk. One is aggressive garbage collection. State is not assumed to hold forever in their publishing model. You must recommit. And I kind of parked that and I thought, okay, it's a burden. I mean, if I were Warren and I've moved my resources into a friendly, happy family, and now suddenly they're nagging me every year that I have to redo a thing, that doesn't feel very friendly. So I could kind of get a vibe of, well, that isn't how we work. But I like clean up your bedroom. That's what garbage collection is. Pick up the dirty socks, take out the dirty teacups. Clean up your garbage. Warren, clean up your garbage. Okay, but clean it again. But so there's that kind of thing that I'm thinking about that. I like the recommit. And there are actually reasons in delegation management that is an activity in the Resource Registration Services Coordination Group, or RSCG. We discuss point of contact validation. It's a policy in APNIC. It's a policy in RIPE and in ARIN, a requirement that you recommit your contact info. So we've already mentally said to you, Anurag, as a delegate of resources, you have to tell us how to talk to you. Why shouldn't we say to you, you have to tell us what your AS set is? You can't just leave it there forever. That's part one. Part two is the syntactic part and the lack of uniqueness part. If Maz is saying that you can make a reference from database source A to an AS set string in database B, you now have a thing which my comrade from the RIPE region, Wilfried Werber, refers to as referential integrity. How do you maintain referential integrity across a distributed database? How does Maz know the AS set that he refers to that vests in another IRR still exists, still represents the collected entity he's talking about? How can he know? And to me, that's an open problem. I don't have a solution to making references outside the framework of a single intent of authority. I have no idea how we solve that problem. And to me, that's the underlying problem that you were referring to. AS sets may not be what you think they are.
Well, what Maz defined is kind of interesting, and I personally made a note to just have a check across all the popular IRRs on how much uniqueness is there for AS sets. But I was referring to a rather more popular, more larger problem, which is a large number of AS sets are full of junk. They'll tell you who at some point the downstreams were, and they just stay like that. And that defeats the whole purpose of filtering based on AS sets.
Job Snijders has been talking about a concept he calls the customer cone.
Okay.
And I think there may be overlap in function. There is a dissent within our community. I think the IETF likes to call this a tussle, but there's a tussle between who signs and the intent of a customer cone. Because in RPKI, the holder of the thing is the signer of the thing. Right. So is the element in the customer cone agreeing to be in the customer cone? Or is the parent who's asserting the customer cone the owner of the thing? And we don't know what the answer is yet. But I think it's possible where Job is going, there's a conversation to be had about how do I say these collected things lie in me, behind me, through me. It's that kind of concept.
Sure, thanks. That explains.
Yoshinobu Matsuzaki from IIJ. Just an adding comment to the analog question. So the AS set contains the number of ASes behind the AS, right? So sometimes you cannot see that because of the BGP, the hiding protocol. So if it's not the best path, then we cannot announce it.
So we have 10 minutes until lunchtime. And we could all sit here and have a jolly good rap about the nature of routing and Whois, or we could round off and I could set you free to have lunch. What would you like? Where silence is consent to be set free. Folks, I think we've closed. I have to say, having subverted the intent of the meeting, I've been given a lot to think about from the presentations of our guests and from the comments from the floor. So although it isn't all about me, I'd like to say that I got a huge amount of benefit thinking about data management, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you for sitting and thank you for participating.